Good day. This is James Spencer from Spencer Music and Artist Development, located in beautiful Long Beach, California. I am a music coach, musicologist, film historian, and a concert pianist. It has truly been an honor to be part of this class, and it's been even a greater honor to be asked to talk a little bit about one of my favorite film composers, Bernard Herrmann. So let's get right to it. In my opinion, Bernard Herrmann, very similar to Mozart, was a prodigy. He was born June 29th, 1911, to Jewish immigrant family in New York. And it was his father, Abram, that saw he had talent and started to cultivate that by age 3. So he studied piano, voice, violin, and composition. When he was only 13 years old, he was already an established composer in New York, winning prestigious composition competitions and premiering his own works. This led to NYU asking him if he would study with the famous American composer Percy Grainger. And he studied with Percy Grainger all through his youth. And then upon graduating from an all-male high school, he went to Juilliard. At Juilliard, he created his own orchestra called the New York Chamber Orchestra, where he premiered not only his own works, but works of other famous composers at the time. This includes people like Charles Ives and Aaron Copland. In 1934, he was hired to become the head of the CBS Symphony Orchestra, and during their broadcast, he presented a show called Exploring Music, where he premiered not only his own orchestral works, but works of famous composers, specifically Charles Ives, and a composer he said that would influence him a great deal in his Hitchcock years, Bela Bartok. Okay? And let's move right on to him moving to Hollywood. And in 1941, he scores his first 2 successful movies, and that is The Devil and Mr. Webster, which he wins an Oscar for Best Score, and Citizen Kane, which was also nominated for a Best Score Oscar. Fascinating. I find it interesting that he explores not only harmonic color, that means, the different types of chords, but also different uses of interesting instrumentation. In Citizen Kane, for example, I remember there's a scene that he scores for 4 alto flutes. Very unusual. Okay? Skipping ahead to 1951, we get his first major sci-fi score, The Day the Earth Stood Still, where he uses the electronic instrument called the theremin. This is what's interesting. It does connect in with Hitchcock because the composer Miklos Rozsa was going to use the theremin in his score for Spellbound. And that's how Bernard Herrmann kind of gets introduced to Hitchcock. Moving ahead to the Hitchcock scores, the first Hitchcock score that Bernard Herrmann does is The Trouble with Harry, 1955. Then we get The Man Who Knew Too Much the same year. It's interesting that a lot of people think that he maybe scored the Storm Clouds Cantata, which is the large orchestral work with choir that is, in the scene at the Royal Albert Hall. But actually, he didn't. It was scored by Arthur Benjamin, an English composer, and then Hitch asked Bernard Herrmann to expand the orchestration and make it into a huge spectacle. What I find interesting of that work, I have to agree with Richard, by the way, that I actually prefer The Man Who Knew Too Much from the earlier period, the British period. But in The Man That Knew Too Much with Jimmy Stewart and Doris Day, Bernard Herrmann makes a cameo. And what I find fascinating is the only other person who made cameos of the Hitch team was Hitchcock himself. So I find that pretty amazing. Okay? I'm going to skip over The Wrong Man and Vertigo, because I think someone else is talking specifically on Vertigo. And also I'm going to skip over North by Northwest and go right to Psycho, which I feel is probably the greatest horror score of them all, the most influential score, and truly that movie doesn't work without the score. What I find fascinating is Hitch was sort of, he was using, television cameras and things to film Psycho on a low budget. And he was going for very little music. So in his notes, like in things, it's like, for example, the hotel scene, he didn't want music. He didn't want music originally in the shower scene. And Herrmann comes in and says, "Are you crazy? Let me do you a great score, and it's going to be phenomenal." What I find interesting is there was a movie that is my favorite Herrmann movie from 1945. It's called Hungover Square. It's a gothic noir piece, very Jack the Ripper period. Phenomenal movie. If you haven't seen it, definitely watch it. And that movie has a piano concerto called the Concerto Macabre. I've actually been blessed to have performed it. And in that work is where he starts delving into things he's going to use in Psycho. One is the use of the augmented fourth, which is a dissonant interval. In the medieval period, it was called Diabolus in Musica. In Hungover Square, it's G to C sharp, specifically. And then we also get in the right hand the chord that's going to basically turn into what we call the Hitchcock Chord. The Hitchcock Chord, or the opening chord from Psycho, is a B-flat minor triad, B-flat, D-flat, F, with an A, which is a major seventh, which is incredibly dissonant. It's very ambiguous. And let's look at the main character. Is Norman Bates, ambiguous? Is he soft? Is he hard? Is he, peaceful? Is he abusive? We see that sort of duality through the movie, and that chord sets it up. And he uses that chord throughout the whole score in arpeggiations, in chords, in taking little tonal cell pieces of those notes and using them. The whole score for Psycho is scored for all strings, which I find fascinating. It's scored for first violin, second violin, viola, cello, and bass. Often two tones to a part. So we can have up to 10 notes and chords playing at the time, which gives us a very thick texture. He also notated to use the mutes on the violin to create that icy effect, which I find fascinating. We also have the use of minor seconds. That would be like C to D flat. Like if I went da 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 da, and we have these ostinatos, that means driving rhythms, dee-da, 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 that creates the extreme tension through that score. It's interesting that John Williams would hear Psycho, take those minor seconds and use it as the theme to Jaws. So it's one of the most influential horror scores. And I know I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to say that Psycho influences so many scores. It also influences a genre of classical music we call minimalism. That's deconstructing the scores down to just a few notes and then having that driving rhythm through those notes to create tension. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and I wish the whole class a wonderful study, and it's been delightful. Thank you.